cure for this one.
Welcome back to Max's Muscle TV, episode 4. I'm joined once again by my good friend and co-host, Scott Goble. And today, mate, we've got a very interesting topic. The future trends of technology when it comes to the fitness industry and where we're at in 2025. Mate, I'm almost going to just turn this one over to you exclusively. I'm sure you've got a diverse range of opinions on all of this.
A couple of years ago, Luke, you talked me into buying a Garmin watch. You were fascinated by the feedback you were getting from it, and you convinced me that it'd be an invaluable part of my training moving forward. And I bought into it, as I buy into, for some reason, many of the things you suggest I do. And I think I wore that thing for a week or two. I was tracking my sleep. I've never slept worse in my entire life than when I wore that watch and I had that sleep data there. And I stopped wearing it after a while and have not gone back to it. But I remember back in my uni days, there was only one piece of tech. It was the polar heart rate monitor. And it was game-changing back then, but we're talking about the 1990s, just to give some insight into how old I am. So some of this stuff has been around for a little while, and it's certainly gone to a whole new level, and you are much more into this sort of tech stuff than I am. So I'm intrigued to hear your thoughts on it. I've done a little bit of research. I had no idea that things had progressed to the rate that they had and what was accessible and available and what is potentially coming up in the future. So I'm very interested in this episode, but I think I can certainly see some pros and some cons to some of these technological advances.
Well, Scotty, when I was looking up potential topics to talk about, emerging trends came up time and time again. It's a trending topic. Lots of people want to know about it. And I think in some regards, you might look at us and say, well, what do these two old dinosaurs know about anything? But, mate, if you think back to when we started in the gym, what was the ability to track any sort of metric and learn anything when it came to bodybuilding at all? You learned a little bit from a bodybuilding magazine that came out that was trying to sell you a cell tech and you could gain 150% muscle mass in this short period of time. But if you actually think about what we've witnessed, we're a lucky generation. Like if you're in your 40s or 50s, you remember life before the digital revolution. You remember when it might have been just a piece of paper and a pen and you weren't really tracking anything. And so what we have seen and what we've experienced, like we've got to see life before this revolution and, we're sort of still part of it now. I mean, yourself, Scott, you're not training people face-to-face in the gym anymore. So you've certainly been very open-minded with the overall approach. But if you just think back, mate, to when you were starting out compared to now and the availability of not like information on the internet, but what you can actually track with, whether you're wearing a heart rate monitor, whether you're tracking things in MyFitnessPal, whatever it might be, it's a full paradigm shift. Like it's a whole new world, and it's not showing any sign of slowing down.
It is an absolute revolution. I remember back in the day, I would try and monitor my heart rate if I wasn't wearing a chest strap with the heart rate monitors on the Life Fitness recumbent bicycle, and they almost always malfunctioned. So I never actually had any sort of accurate heart rate. I really gauged my cardio and calorie expenditure by duration. I could add up the weights on the bar. And that was about the extent of me tracking metrics. There was no step count to be monitored back then. They probably had some old school pedometers, but it was just wasn't something that was addressed. And nowadays, it seems like through the integration of a technology or a combination of technologies, you can actually garner some really valuable information. And for me in particular, I'm intrigued by the ability to monitor calorie expenditure, because obviously a huge thing that I do is look at energy balance, whether we're trying to build muscle or we're trying to drop body fat. So that's one that is interesting to me. And sometimes I have my clients send me through some feedback. It looks like some sort of colorful spiral off their Apple Watch, and they'll send it to me and they'll go, look at this. And I'll be like, I've got no idea what I'm looking at here. So you might have to explain this to me, but they'll be really impressed with their little data readout that they've got. And once they translate it to me, there's sometimes some interesting stuff there. And then sometimes they'll say to me, look, I'm in 1,000 calorie deficit. My Apple smartwatch says I am. And I'll say, yeah, but you look fatter and you gain weight this week. So not 100% sure on the accuracy of that. So there's probably going to be some approaches which are more accurate than others. And I'm keen to hear your thoughts because you have dived deeper in this than I have.
Definitely. Look, the one thing I'll say, Scotty, that has been absolutely game changing for me has been the gamification of fitness. Now, you see this all the time with things like language learning apps and maths apps and just different trackers, habit trackers. The gamification of actually seeing my statistics at the end of the day, step count, resting heart rate, rough approximations of sleep and things like that, very rough calorie expenditure, which we'll talk about soon, which is very inaccurate. But just to see that on a screen, gamification, it's been game changing. I'm going to go as far as to say that post bodybuilding, I don't think I would have been able to achieve what I have in the gym with my fitness if I wasn't tracking all of this data. So I've been completely sold just on the gamification aspect. So I have a question for you, Scotty. Am I cheating? Am I cheating by doing this? Because I'm not really focusing. So, I mean, I'm focusing on the fitness outcomes, of course, but it's a competition between myself and Marika and a competition with other clients. So is that cheating, I guess, from a purist fitness perspective?
If you are an old school dinosaur, then perhaps it is cheating, but it's obviously not. It's just a means of probably motivating yourself with these little external metrics and the competitive aspect that it brings to the table. I am completely out of the game. I track my steps with my phone in my pocket, but I'm very diligent with it, Luke, to the point where I'm quite convinced that my wife thinks I'm having an affair, because I'll be like, I'm going to take the bins out, and I'll stand up and my phone will be sitting on the table, and I'll look at her, I'll look at my phone, I'll be like, and I'll grab my phone and put it in my pocket, and I'll go take the bins out. So she's probably thinking, what's this guy hiding? But I'm just like, no, I've got to count the steps, all right? So it's something that I'm well and truly behind on. And I haven't seen these benefits. So the gamification, I'm not even familiar with the term gamification. I'm nodding along like I'm understanding, but you might have to explain that to me. So you're collecting data and pitting it against other people's data?
Yeah, but just in the way that it's displayed, like hitting new weekly targets of, say, steps, and just looking back and seeing the target across the whole year as an example, looking at maybe the maximum heart rate that I've hit for a particular session if I'm doing some HIIT or some metabolic conditioning, watching my resting heart rate come down post bodybuilding to a lower level, looking at the very loose metrics with sleep. So I guess it's kind of just displaying it in a really user-friendly way that, is appealing for especially kids. I mean, gamification is huge with kids. Just looking at it in a visually appealing way that's kind of novel, and it makes difficult tasks seem a bit easier because you can see your progression over time, and you've also got some objective measures that you're working towards. So, if you've had a good session, if you've underperformed. And I've just found that has been, for me personally, and I know for my wife as well, we love that aspect. We're completely sold on it. The idea of gamification for fitness, completely sold on it. Found that it has been absolutely fantastic. But I guess the main sort of, fitness wearable that we'll be thinking about, mate, I've still got this one here. It's the Phoenix 7X. This is my second Phoenix. I've had a smartwatch for coming up to about 5 years, and it has been amazing. And there's some things that the smartwatches do pretty good, and there's some things that they don't really do very well. So one of the things they do really well is the step count. Very, very reliable with the step count. I've also found that walking up and down the stairs at home, it's very good at telling you how many sets of stairs you've done for the day. So just in terms of accuracy, one of the highlights there definitely is your overall step count. Another one is your heart rate when you're training. And look, the wristwatch, because it uses a light sensor to detect pulses of blood, and that's how it works out your heart rate, certainly it's not as effective as something like a chest strap. So what I do is I use a Bluetooth chest strap that works on your heart's ECG. I believe the Bluetooth chest straps now, the latest ones, they're about 99.6% accurate compared to medical grade equipment. So you can get some really, really objective measures of what your heart rate's doing, whether it's your resistance training, whether it's your cardio, really, really good stuff about that. And then the other thing that it does really well is heart rate variability. So looking at the time between the different stages of your heartbeat, and then if that time drops too low, it's a good indication that your recovery demands are not being met. It's a good indication maybe you need more sleep, maybe you've got to back training off. When it comes up higher, it tends to show you that you're getting more rest. The parasympathetic nervous system's kicking in, that rest and digest nervous system. So those three metrics, step count, heart rate when you're training and heart rate variability. Found that they are really, really helpful. Consistent step count, making sure that I'm hitting the right intensity with the training, in particular with your HIIT and your Metcon, and also your heart rate variability to see when you need to take extra rest and recovery. And I find that those metrics are actually pretty good. One of the things I found with the heart rate, because I understand when it comes to bodybuilding, there's going to be more of a resistance training component where you're not necessarily worried about, your heart rate while you're training as such. It might be a better metric to get, if you're looking at your cardio, I want to get to this sort of heart rate. I want to be able to sort of, keep it stable. So with the resistance training, it might give, a lot of people think it might give helpful metrics. One thing I do like, if I'm doing really, really heavy sets, say I've got a rest period that might be, I don't know, a minute and a half as an example, and I'm doing a really heavy leg press. That minute and a half comes around again, like I've had the rest period, but my heart rate's still really high. In those circumstances, because I'm wearing the chest strap and I'm very certain of the accuracy, I might extend the rest period by 30 seconds or even a minute to get my heart rate down, because it's not really an effort where I'm looking at muscular endurance. I'm looking at maximizing the amount of weight I can do for that particular set given the rep ranges. And if the heart rate's too high, I found that can really affect your performance during the set. So that's one thing that I found very, very helpful when it comes to resistance training, is just watching that heart rate come back down on my heaviest sets and making sure that it comes down to an appropriate level before I kick things off. But those three metrics, Scotty, they are pretty damn accurate when it comes to a smartwatch.
I have a follow-up question there, Luke, and this will again give you some insight into the pedantic way in which I coach. I like to separate cardio from steps. I like them to be separate data points rather than all-inclusive. And my theory behind that is that steps, by definition, should be rather low intensity. They should not be interfering with performance, recovery, things of that nature. Whereas cardio is something different. Now we're trying to build or burn a lot of calories in a shorter space of time. And we know that can have some sort of impact on either performance if you do it prior, or recovery if you do it after, the interference effect and all that sort of stuff. Does your fancy Phoenix watch allow you to separate these two things while wearing it all day?
No, and I think this sort of goes back to what we're talking about last episode with raw weight versus cooked weight. What is more accurate? And certainly taking steps outside of your exercise will improve the accuracy of what you're doing by, allow you to keep that constant step count no matter what. I guess, when it comes to simplicity, I like to aim for just the daily step count, just so I know I'm hitting this every day. I know that depending on the exercise, there can be a lot of variation. So as an example, if I'm doing a walk run on the treadmill, that's going to get my steps up really high. But if I'm on the exercise bike, I'm going to have to make up more steps for that day because it hasn't been tracked during the exercise. So it's kind of like the raw weight, cooked weight. Convenience, I've got a set target I'm aiming for every day. If I'm doing activity where the step count won't be picked up, I'll have to get in extra steps for that day, which will increase my calorie expenditure for the day. If I'm doing an activity where it is including my steps, then I'm not going to be able to distinguish between that. But purely just for consistency over time, I find you can get a really good balancing spot, because you can assess your overall calorie expenditure based on other metrics like your waist measurement or your body weight or your composition. And I do find over time that balances out. So it's accuracy versus convenience, and I'm sitting a bit more into the convenience camp at the moment.
How addicted to the data are you? Like how does it impact you if you don't hit your targets? Because I see my clients all the time. Their scale weight, if their scale weight's not what they want to see, it can have an emotional response. And I must admit, I think I've got a little bit of OCD. I've diagnosed myself with all sorts of psychological personality disorders, but I kind of got addicted to step count there for a while, and I felt compelled, like utterly compelled to hit it. And I almost couldn't go to bed unless I ticked off 10,000 steps. And this led me to doing all sorts of bizarre things like racking up 4,000 steps, lapping a kitchen counter bench one time and things of that nature just in order to tick it off. Do you find that you are sort of emotionally engaged in this data? Well,
I'll give you an example, Scotty. When I go to bed at night and I'm laying there with Marika, one of the activities that we do every night is we compare the scores
Tell me
on our
more.
watch.
Tell me more.
Is we compare the scores on our smartwatches to see who has been training harder, who has got more steps in. It's actually a pretty serious rivalry there. Like, I'm not joking. It is a serious rivalry. You know, if I go back maybe a year, I was going in for a HIIT session in the gym. I left my chest strap at home. I'm walking in the door. Mate, I had to have a serious talk to myself about, you know, the drop in motivation that I was experiencing because I wasn't wearing the chest strap. No one really looks at the figures. Like, it's just a little battle for myself and Marika. So I had to have a real, like, serious think about my motivation for training and what it was right now. And I actually, just a couple of weeks ago, mate, I forgot the chest strap when I was doing a HIIT session. And I got to say, I just focused on the work and the fitness benefits, not that I'm not going to miss out on the score and the tracking after. So there is certainly an element there. But I guess that was why I was asking that question about, you know, is it cheating? If that gives you an advantage and it's tied into something as superficial as your ongoing score with some silly app, well, I mean, I'll take it, mate. I'll take it.
Yeah, it sounds like me if I rock up to the gym without my earpods. I'm just like, I don't think I can do this workout. Like, it's just it doesn't even count. But I look, yeah, it's funny how obsessive I've gotten. I've done something, realized that I haven't had my phone in my pocket, so the steps don't count. I'll put my phone in my pocket and I'll retrace those steps. in order to tick them off. So just so it's registered in my phone, which absolutely no one else pays attention to or cares about in the slightest.
There you go.
It is interesting to me how these data points become quite addictive and maybe even have a negative impact on your psyche, even if they're having a positive impact on your physical health. So
definitely.
smartwatches is the one that most people are familiar with. What
just
else
on
is
that,
there?
With the strengths, those three that we said, but there's actually a few limitations with smartwatches. There's a couple of things that it doesn't do really well, and you've touched on it, Scotty, and that was calorie expenditure while you're training. Wildly inaccurate, and there are studies that have been done where it's been out by like 110%. I think that was the Apple Fitwatch actually that had that. And so there's a few reasons for it. Number one, it's based on just algorithms and estimations. So the absolute calorie expenditure for a particular activity, that's not accurate. That's been conclusively shown not to be accurate. The relative score between different training sessions, that tends to be more accurate. So if you're doing a workout, let's say you're doing a cardio session, your heart rate's gone up for that for 30 minutes, whatever it might be. Then you do another cardio session on a different piece of equipment. That relative score, it's a lot more accurate than the absolute score. So it can be a useful measure for exercise intensity. But you've got to think about some considerations. Say I go into the gym, I'm 100 kilos, I do a 100 kilo bench press, and my heart rate doesn't really increase much. I do 10 reps, I can bang it out relatively easily. Then let's say there's another 100 kilo individual who goes in the gym, doesn't have as much muscle mass, doesn't have as much strength. They do a 60 kilo bench press, their heart rate's screaming. Their Fitwatch is going to show that their calorie expenditure is a lot greater than mine. Now, you can offset that by actually putting the reps and the weight that you do into your smartwatch in between sets. But I found that to be cumbersome, and it's a bit clunky, and it's certainly not something that I've enjoyed doing because you got to load your program in that. So that is a big limitation when it comes to the Fitwatches, is the calorie expenditure while you're training.
Because the calorie expenditure, what's it going to be based off? Obviously, it's an algorithm, but there would be a heart rate component to it. Because if you hook that up to your chest strap, like, will that count? Because obviously you utilize that for your cardiovascular work. Does it work with resistance training as well, or you're just purely monitoring that? Recovery between sets.
Yeah, but just seeing as well how your heart rate increases during the sets is interesting. And I'll give you an example. So, we know Andrew Locke's all these great core routines, bird dogs, McGill curl-ups, planks, all that good stuff. As I start to advance through those, like maybe a side plank on my hand with a leg abduction, that sends my heart rate through the roof. And just seeing my heart rate go through the roof, in my own mind, I'm like, oh, okay, it is a difficult exercise. It's not me just being, just sort of thinking I'm weak and I'm sort of, this is just a simple exercise and it's gassing me out. Like, it is actually very, very difficult. So again, it's that in-your-face element where I can see what is going on during the session. some people might not find that data in any way useful at all, but I got to say, I found it to be extremely useful. I have.
Okay. No, you're not going to convince me to buy a Garmin again. I've probably still got it sitting in a drawer somewhere. So if I didn't wear it then, I'm not sure if I'm going to wear it now. But I wonder what is out there, because I'm not into invasive devices. I don't like wearing jewelry. I don't like things hanging around on my body for some reason. I literally wear zero jewelry whatsoever. What else is out there? Because I am interested in steps and probably heart rate variability more so than anything else. My one experience with monitoring sleep really made me so conscious of my sleep that I honestly believe that it made my sleep worse, for whatever reason that is. Again, one of my
just on that,
disorders.
Sleep is one thing, and assessing the sleep stages, that's something that is not as accurate. So that's something that is lower in accuracy. Good to give you a bit of a rough idea, but it doesn't pick up the sleep stages really accurately. So that's one other thing on the sleep. On the smartwatches that they don't do too well, is the sleep stage tracking. But, Scotty, there's other options, my friend. There's fit rings and fitness bands. I have never used either one of them, but they're designed specifically for someone who doesn't want to watch, doesn't need a display. So they've got really good battery life because they just talk to your phone and you look at everything on the app. So fit rings and smart bands in particular seem to have really taken off over the past couple of years for people who don't want to wear watches. I think a big driving factor of that is because they want to stay on top of their daily step count. That seems to be the most popular thing that people look for when it comes to some of these wearables, is your daily step count.
I found when I was wearing my Garmin, my step count was always higher than what my Apple phone, would record. Like, I'd be hitting my 10,000 steps at 2 p.m. and I'd be like, oh, typically it takes me till 6 p.m. to hit this, or something like that. I've heard people say that just with arm movement alone, you'll start to register steps and things of that nature. Is that true, or is it based off GPS technology, or does it differ device to device? Do you know?
It differs device to device. The Garmin's have the GPS in there, but they're constantly updating their own algorithms. So as they're getting more and more feedback, because they're collecting all of this data, as they improve the algorithm, they are able to distinguish a lot better between your natural sort of gait and walk and cadence versus your arm just moving around. Because I've often thought, how does it know the difference between, walking up a set of stairs or just walking in a straight line? And it's because, they've got these algorithms really nailed down, and they're very precise with their movements and things like that. So even if there's a small discrepancy with the step count, it's quite low at the moment. It's certainly not high enough to disregard the information as not being accurate. Something like your total calories during training, disregard, it's not accurate. Once again, the relative score is good, but the absolute sort of score for your step count, that's quite accurate.
And I would imagine the Fitband's probably working on the exact same technology as the watch in terms of monitoring heart rate and things like that. So the pros and the cons would be very similar between the two. It's just less obtrusive, I suppose.
100%. It works off the same underlying technology. But, something that I didn't know there was a lot of, and I was looking into it, Scotty, was smart clothing. I thought we weren't there yet with it. There's a number of different brands, and there are challenges, and there's challenges with accuracy. But if we think about the way the world's heading, the technology, the wearable industry is 110 billion Australian dollars this year. Worldwide. So it's a massive growing industry. But one thing that I thought, Scotty, that you might like with the wearables, like the clothing, is they're starting to have some models come out, or pieces of clothing that can look at muscle fiber activation, and it can actually, it's like a bodysuit, and it can tell you, what muscles are doing the maximum amount of work. So say you're doing a bench press, as an example, someone might put, more delts and chest. This information is going to start to be available, but is this death by data, Scotty, or is this really important stuff? And just like we've learned from when we started in the fitness industry, the improvements aren't going to stop, and it's just a matter of staying quite flexible with the approach. But is it valuable data? You think things like this?
I think it could be. Certainly in particular context, maybe when you're talking about exercise rehabilitation and things of that nature, or if you've injured one side of your body and not the other, and you're performing a bilateral movement, and you can register how much activation is taking place in each limb, and see how the force is distributed. I think that can be really valuable. There is, I would imagine, some limitations to the technology when we're talking about sort of surface I assume it's a magnetic resonance type of thing when it comes to muscle activation. The surface ones isn't nearly as good as the, probes that they drive into the actual muscle tissue itself. So there's going to be some degree of limitation to it, but that's with everything. And over time, I'm sure that will get better and better. But that is the sort of thing that would really interest me. And I believe it would interest a lot of my clients as well. Like if I could get someone doing a split squat and say, all right, this variation with this foot position has allowed you to activate 60% glute and 40% quad. But when you do it this way, it's 60% quad and 40% glute. My bikini girls would be just going crazy for that sort of information. Like they would absolutely love it. So this one was something I was completely oblivious to. I didn't even know it was on the market. But to me, this is probably the most fascinating piece of technology we've got coming up. And as it becomes more widespread and more accurate, I think it's going to be incredibly valuable for bodybuilders and resistance trainers.
Well, they're looking at sort of where this technology is going is to assess movement patterns as well. So if you're doing a complex movement, a hip hinge movement, you're doing a deadlift, to be able to get live feedback about your movement pattern and how you should correct your form based on how the body's actually moving in its entirety, as well as the local muscle activation. And that was what was coming up quite a bit when I was looking into it, as where things are heading is for that movement pattern assessment across all types of activities, not just weightlifting, running, swimming, like you name it.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing to me. So I'm intrigued to see, even diving a little bit deeper, what is on the market now and what the limitations are. I imagine it's still very rudimentary, a lot of this technology, and I'm not sure how it works out from a practicality standpoint in terms of, washing it and things like that. If I'm not going to get electrocuted if I sweat too much or anything along those lines, I hope. But I'm super intrigued by the smart clothing, I must admit. And I assume it's all just synced to the phone or synced to some device, I'm sure. But it's truly uncharted territory for me.
It is. It's crazy. And look, a couple other things there was your goggles, your smart glasses where you can get heads-up display, and also earbuds. So that's all heading in the same direction with sort of what we've been talking about, just getting all that feedback straight in. But let's move on to artificial intelligence, Scotty, AI. So you've got all of these data points coming in. Like maybe one day you've got hundreds of data points coming in. You can't be across all of it. That's crazy. We know that, AI in particular, like your large language models, your transformer models, they're very, very good at pattern recognition. It's what they excel at. So say you're collecting all of this data, what calorie and macro targets have been set, what they're eating on MyFitnessPal, their heart rate, their measurements, absolutely everything. It's all coming in. Mate, would you trust AI to give you an appraisal of all of that information, or do you need to specifically look through all of the points yourself? I guess this is more of an overall philosophical question about your views of coaching and where things are going. But where do you sit with AI, with its ability to take in massive amounts of data and then give recommendations based on the patterns?
I think AI is going to be brilliant from a purely objective, rational perspective, but it's obviously going to discount emotion, external factors, and things of that nature, which is where the human interaction is beneficial. But I think AI could provide very objective feedback and say, look, your resting heart rate is elevated, your core temperature is slightly elevated, your heart rate variability has been disturbed, you are under recovered. And I think that's a pretty objective analysis that would be beneficial to a lot of athletes that perhaps need that confirmation because, again, emotionally, they're very invested in their plans and protocols and they don't want to step back. They probably have to be told definitively you have gone too far and you need to rest. So I think AI is going to play an incredibly prominent role in this sort of stuff, and I think it's going to be incredibly valuable. I don't know that it can take over coaching altogether, but it can take over a lot of it, and it scares me, Luke. It scares me.
Yeah, mate, you only got to follow where the investment's going. Like a few years ago, it was all the big tech companies, which are the biggest companies in the world. But now you look at like geopolitical issues like Taiwan as an example, and the US and China potentially going to war because 91% of all of the chips in the world are made in Taiwan. So, there's this push for sovereign AI. So what I'm saying is the investment's only going to just keep picking up, and the technology is going to keep increasing. So let's play devil's advocate, Scotty. Let's say that not only can AI look at all of this information and give recommendations, but it can give feedback in a way where people feel like they're being listened to, like there's a connection there, like they genuinely feel like AI is doing the job. They're getting great success. Would you be open, Scotty, then to training, say, 1,000 people where you're using like a Scott Goble digital avatar, and if all of your clients were super happy, they're getting great results, the price point's a little lower, they're not paying as much for your coaching anymore because there's AI, but it's all you, it's Scott talking to them, it's Scott giving them an assessment. What do you say, mate? Are you open to that?
Yes, I am. Absolutely, I'm open to it. Because the only issue is the morality. And if everyone is aware that this is what's going on and they're getting the results they want and they feel like they're getting the interaction they want, then I see no downside to it. The only issue I would have is if, and I've joked about this to some of my clients that, there are robot Scott's actually coaching them and I'm just sort of sitting back and I just appear at the bodybuilding shows at the end. If that was the case, it would probably be a little unethical, but man, outside of that, I've got no issue whatsoever. But
let's say everyone's on board. They know it's AI, Scott. Like they know that it's your knowledge base. It's been trained on, let's say, thousands of hours of your videos, mate, that you make. It's all above board. There's no problem. It's a lower price point. It's just your coaching now is you're coaching 1,000 people with lower touch points rather than that one-on-one super intensive sort of coaching.
It sounds amazing, Luke. It sounds amazing. I can sit back and sip cocktails and watch the money roll in as AI Scott does his work.
Mate, one last thing before we wrap this one up. So this is an interesting topic. It's still, future, but implantable technology. So whatever it might be, I read this article once going back a couple of years, and it was about like a tooth that could be put in. And they reckon that because the tooth, if it vibrates through your head, and you can hear it very easily because sound passes very easily through there. So they're talking about it as being like a mobile phone and tracking all of your metrics and that type of thing. If the technology reached a point where it was working amazingly well, what do you think, Scotty, would be your biggest roadblock from actually implementing the technology yourself on a personal level? Like, what would be all right, I don't want anything sort of implanted, and then now all of a sudden I've got to have this. This is the way forward. Do you see yourself getting into a situation like that if technology keeps advancing?
I can see this happening. It would be very interesting to see user uptake if it was like government endorsed. I feel like it would be incredibly low. But for me personally, I don't care about any of that stuff. Like even in terms of face recognition and all this sort of stuff, I'm like, oh, what are you going to see me do? You're going to see me drive from the gym to Coles and then back home and then do that again the next day with maybe a stop at a school. I live an incredibly boring life. You're not going to get any interesting data to use against me because I'm not up to anything even remotely interesting. So this invasion of privacy, and it's probably very legitimate for some people, is not a legitimate concern for me. So I'm not as resistant to this sort of stuff. But I can certainly understand when it comes to data sharing and the ramifications of that people would be very, very hesitant to be chipped. So I'm interested in it. I would imagine it would be incredibly valuable, potentially even for legitimate medical issues, diabetics and things of that nature. I don't know if that technology is available in terms of monitoring blood sugar levels and things. But even in terms of those at risk of cardiovascular disease and all sorts of things, I would imagine there'd be true health ramifications from some of these chips going in, and it could be extrapolated out to, our domain of the fitness industry for certain. My concerns are minimal with something like this, but I could imagine a lot of people would be very, very resistant to it.
100%. I think even from an ethical point of view, maybe even religious, they just don't want something implanted into them. But again, just looking at where all this is heading, it seems like that's going to be the natural sort of progression of this technology. Like it's going from your wearable, smaller to a ring, smaller again, maybe an implant. I do see the biggest thing will be just that 0 to 1 shift, where people go, I'm dead set against it. and then something comes out that's super useful. You know, maybe a famous celebrity is doing something, or the military are very innovative with sort of how they go for things, and then people are like, I've just got to have that. It's just got to be the way forward. And I really see that as being the real pivotal moment where things will change. But, you know, one thing, Scotty, I didn't mention it. So there are like patches and things you can put on now for your glucose monitoring. But, I mean, if you're just a healthy person training in the gym, do you really need to confirm that having some food is going to elevate your blood sugar? Or are you just getting into that sort of world of, you know, really obsessing over data that is just not that important to you, and you know, potentially making some poor lifestyle changes like eating restrictively and things like that because you're monitoring, you know, your blood glucose? Because that's something that I did forget to mention before. That's one of the biggest emerging trends in wearables. It's still only a small portion of people do it, but it is one of the biggest potential emerging trends in the future is regular glucose monitoring. But if you're healthy and fit, like my blood sugars come up because I've eaten, but
yeah, I feel like if you're healthy and you're fit and you've just got some, you know, general fitness goals, it'll be fine. If we want to talk cutting edge bodybuilding and the use of growth hormone and insulin and things of that nature, there might be a practical application for it, which could be interesting. But yeah, for the average person, look, to be fair, people have been fit and healthy without any of this technology. So none of it is a necessity, I would say. But if it makes the process more engaging, if it makes it more fun, if it makes it more interesting for you, then it's upside, isn't it? So I've got nothing against it. But for me personally, I gauge my recovery between sets on how I feel rather than my heart rate. Has my, you know, breathing semi-returned to normal? Now I'll go again. In terms of cardio training, I like to work at a challenging yet sustainable pace. That's it. You know, like that's and as far as my step count is concerned, I can monitor it with my phone. So I'm an absolute minimalist with this sort of stuff. But I can certainly see the benefits, and I think I would have benefited a lot more because I am no elite athlete anymore. I'm at maintenance levels now. So when back in the day, I would overtrain for certain, and I would ignore all the signs. I think it would be very beneficial for a lot of my sort of hyper motivated A-type personality clients to have some insight into heart rate variability, resting heart rates, body temperatures, and things of that nature, which indicates overtraining. That's where I see the greatest practical application for my client base.
yeah, nice. Well, there you go. You got two very diverse opinions. Scotty and I have been honest. Someone who is happy with a minimalist approach, someone who is addicted to gamification when it comes to fitness. And yeah, man, we might leave it at that. So thanks for coming, Scotty. If you are liking MuscleTV podcast, it's thanks to Max's Protein. We appreciate the support, Max's. Check out their range of protein powders they have available. Please like the video, comment on the video, and share. And if you're not a subscriber, hit that subscribe button, and we will catch you next episode.
There's no cure for this one.